Hey everyone, my name is Pavel Koto and I would love to talk to you about some interesting visual effects which are achievable in Verge3D. Here you can see the final result of the scene that I created. As you can see, it uses a lot of different visual effects. But today we will talk about particles, or how to fake them. As you may know, Verge3D doesn't support Blender particles or particles. Of course, you can use some 3GS particles or code them yourself, but here we are looking at this from artist's perspective, somebody who doesn't know programming well. Of course, particles come in all different shapes and sizes. So today we'll talk about this kind of spark effect or sparticles. This kind of magic sci-fi-ish looking glowing floating sparks. Alright, so let's start with analyzing the effect, because before we start to create it, to fake it, we need to understand how it works. Here is my scene in Blender. As you can see, here is this effect. It uses Blender particle system. I have several meshes which emit particles. As you can see, here is the particle settings. One system is for the opening wings and another system is for closing wings. The particles are created on these wings and then they are pushed with the help of this physics force. So I just kind of push particles in the direction that I need them, from the center. This is a simple Blender physics force, which is called force, which just pushes the particles away, that's all. Here is the particle. As you can see, it's just kind of sparkly particle. To make the particles look different, random, I added them random rotation. So you can see the particles are looking perfectly random, even though it is one same particle. Also, you may notice the longer the particles live, the smaller and dimmer they become. Okay, so let's analyze it. First, the particles are random, they come in different shapes. Second, the particles grow dimmer and smaller with time, they kind of die out. Third, the direction of particles, they are being emitted from the center to the sides, they are moving. And fourth, our particles are glowing, they have this kind of sci-fi-ish glow. And now, as we have analyzed the effect, let's create it. We will be using Blender and specifically Blender materials. Here you can see the final result of our today's tutorial, and we will create it from scratch. First, we need to create a plane and rotate it towards the camera. Then let's create new material for our plane. Now the first thing that we need for our material is a texture, a cloud noise seamless texture, just like that. As you can see, here is this cloud texture with some noise dots for a little bit more of this grainy effect, which will help us create sparks. So let's put it into our material. You can create this type of texture in any 2D software, just make sure that texture is seamless. Also, yeah, I'm using a special add-on which lets me preview nodes. It's called Node Preview. Okay, so we need to use this texture and put it in emission strength and alpha inputs of Principied BSDF. Then let's set emission color. This is the color that I used for my project, but for our example, let's set something more electrifying, like that. Okay, now we have one output, two inputs, and we need to work with them both. So let's add a reroute. We press shift and with right mouse click, we kind of draw a line and make a reroute. Now we can easily work with both lines. So first, let's add a node converter math. It is an amazing node. Let's set a multiply add, which will help us work with the gradient of this node. Multiply makes it more contrast, and add works like brightness. Basically, it's just brightness contrast node. Alright, our picture is getting dark. We don't want this. Let's select the Principled BSDF and go to the N panel. There in Options, we need to set transparency, blend mode to alpha blends. The shadow mode needs to be alpha clip. Now our image is transparent, but it looks a bit weird. That is because alpha parameter goes beyond 0. When alpha is less than 0, we have some weird results with it. So we need to kind of clamp it. For clamping, let's add another math node only for alpha. Set it to multiply by 1 and select clamp. Alright, now we are talking. This is the correct result. We will be going back to this multiply add node and tweak it some more because this is the main node where we create these interesting random noise sparks. Also, what you see right now is not what we will see in a fresh Blender file. We need to activate one special option. Go to the render options and set bloom. Bloom adds this interesting glowy effect to bright materials, and that's exactly what we want. So when you start your file from scratch, please remember to activate bloom. Alright, back to our texture. Now let's make it move. For the texture to move, we need to animate vector coordinates for this texture. Before we start animating, our scene with wings opening is exactly 80 frames. So all our animations will be looped to 80 frames. In your project you don't have to be so strict like I am, but yeah, that's something that we need to keep in mind for this exact scene. Alright, let's start animating. For this we need to select output from vector and input here UV map. After that we need to add some instruments to control it. We need converter separate color and converter combine color. Then let's select them both and press F 2 times for green and blue channel. Well, we don't actually need blue channel, but I like to keep it tidy. Now let's let another math node and put it above red channel. And now if we change value, we can control movement of the texture. Basically, we are moving UV map, just like this, but with material. But we need to move it by y-axis, it will be much easier this way. As you can see, red channel is for x-axis, so let's Ctrl-X the add node, add another math add node, but into the green channel. Alright, now we are moving vertically. Also, if you'd like cleaner setup, you can do it this way. Just combine color into the green channel and UV map into the mapping node. Combine color goes into the location of mapping. You can just say that I am more of a old school ways enjoyer, that's why my setup is slightly more complicated. Alright, it was a little bit of a spoiler. Yes, we need a value node to control this setup. value node can be animated in Verge3D. That's why we need these nodes to control our material, our texture. Let's start animating. Alright, remember about 80 frames. You don't actually need to do it exactly like I did, 80 frames. I just wanted this animation to be looped in Blender, so I made it 80 frames too. Let's go to the first frame of our animation. Hover the cursor above value nodes and press I. Now let's go to the last frame of animation and set the whole number like 1 or 2 and press I again. Now let's press Ctrl Tab. Ctrl Tab changes between dop sheet and curves. And yeah, I actually changed this layout a bit. There was file browser and I changed it to dop sheet. It will be easier because everything will be on one screen. Alright, let's go to curves and press V and select vector. That's a quick way to make our curve linear, because we want our texture to move in a linear fashion. Alright, the first step is done. The texture is moving. Good, but not great. As you can see, it's kind of boring, and we can see just a moving texture, not interesting, sparkly, changing random sparks, just like we have here. So let's make it more interesting. For this, we just need to double all this setup. Select it all, Shift D, and let's place it over here. Now let's move it a little bit and duplicate the math node. Let's change it to multiply and put it here, in both red and green channels. These two nodes in this setup will work as a scaling for texture. Let's see. Let's move output here. Look at our texture. Right, nice. And now if we change one of the multiplies, we will see that the texture is scaling on one of the axes. Again, the same as we were to scale UV. Both multiplies by default have 0.5 value in the lower channel, and that's exactly what we need. That's the setup. And now we need to mix these two textures together. For that we need another multiply node, and we just put our textures into the values of this multiply node. Let's see now how it works. Kind of dim. Let's work a little bit with our brightness contrast. Oh yeah, and let's not forget about making this texture move as well. So let's delete this value and put into add from our lower value, which is animated. Now both textures are moving and it is changing. As you can see now, our sparks are much more random. Also, because of different scales, the textures are moving with different speeds. And that's what we want them to do, because it adds more randomness. If we want to change scale, we can do it with multiply nodes, or we can just go into the UV editor and scale it, but we need to scale it by the whole number, for example as 2. That will scale our UV twice. So now we can have more sparks on our plane. By the way, we can control speeds of both our textures. For this we need multiply nodes. This is speed multiplier. Let's set it to 2, and the texture above will move twice as fast. Alright, now we have moving random sparks. Now let's time it. Remember, we need this effect to appear only when wings are opening and closing. For this, again, we need another multiplied node, and let's put it before our brightness contrast. Here we'll add another value which will control appearance and disappearance of sparks. The wings are opening on a frame 30. We can see it on an example here. Let's look at timing closely. The sparks start to appear at 27th frame and they disappear at 37th frame. Okay, let's find our plane because it's invisible and repeat the same animation. 26th frame, 25th frame. Again, pressing I to create a keyframe in value 0, then 3 or 4 frames later we will set it to, about 1. Setting keyframe, and remember we always can control the brightness with our multiply add mode. Then let's go to 40th frame and punch in another keyframe with value 0, so the effect will disappear. Now we need to duplicate this animation. Let's select value node, go to curves, and just select everything and duplicate it, Shift D, to about 60th frame. Alright, the animation is working. Let's make it a little bit more bright. Well, to think about it, we need to move it a little bit closer, somewhere about here, to make the timing perfect. Alright, here we go, the effect is done. We can even scale it a little bit, but before we do that, let's make our effect more realistic. As you can see now, all the spots appear and disappear at the same time. But we don't want that. We want the sparks on the top to be brighter and sparks on bottom to be dimmer. So we need kind of additional gradient. Let's add it. A quick way to add a gradient is to go to Vertex Paint, then change to solid rendering to see what we are drawing, and with black color selected, from here we'll just paint the bottom line black. And here we go, our gradient is done. Now we need to address it in our nodes. First, let's go back to render shading, and I think let's delete this connection for now. It will be easier to work with this way. So now we need to add the gradient that we created into our nodes. Again, we need a multiply nodes again before our brightness contrast. Then we need to add nodes color attribute, input color attribute, and here let's select attribute, that is the vertex color that we just created. Then let's just put this color into our multiply node, and now as we can see our texture is affected by the gradient. The sparks are disappearing right around the center. We can actually control this gradient by adding converter color ramp and changing its settings. With this setup, you can make your gradient work just the way you want it to work. If you look at our example, we can see that both up and down are dimmed. That's because it is made a little bit more complicated. Here we have this kind of geometry, up and down are painted black, and vertices close to them are painted dark gray. That's how we can achieve a bit more complicated gradient. Alright, now our work in Blender is done. Let's touch up a little bit, make it look a little bit more flashy, more sparkly. Maybe fix animation a little bit so it will go quicker, and of course again enable the flashing animation when our sparks appear and disappear with the wings. To make sparks go faster, let's go to the first animated value and add the multiply node right after it and set multiply node to 2. Now the sparks will move twice as fast. Okay, before we move to Verge, here is a little bonus. Not for this project, but for the effects overall. We'll work a little bit with geometry. First, we can make the bottom parts wider, so the sparks will not flow exactly downwards, but in kind of fan-shaped directions. Let's scale it a bit by x-axis with proportional editing enabled, and now it goes to the sides as well. But we can go even crazier. I prepared this little bonus, I call it sci-fi sausage, and as you can see, we can create any shape that we want for this effect. Here I'm using a subdivided mesh and a Blender curve, which work together to create any shape that we want for our sparks to follow. Let's look at the geometry. I created this long mesh, and also I duplicated it and rotated to some degrees, so it will look volumetric from different sides. In our first example, we use the plane, so we can look at it only from front and back. But if we duplicate geometry, rotate it 90 degrees, we will get this volumetric effect, which we can look at from different angles. But here we spot another problem. We see patterns. That is easily fixable. We need to go to the UV editor and move our UV a little bit, just like that. So the patterns are now gone. So yeah, this is a pretty flexible effect that can be applied in just any way and form that you like it to work. Okay, let's move on. So I've cleaned this scene from other objects. The only one left is our initial plane. Also, I've turned off the pulsating animation, so it won't stand in a way when we will be setting up the glowing bloom effect in Verge. Later we will enable it again. Alright, let's export it all to Verge. And I absolutely love Verge export. Of course, we can go to File, then to Export, Verge3D GLTF, then select the folder destination, press Export Verge3D GLTF. That's also a way, but hear me out. We can press F3 and then put here Verge. Here we need to select File, Export Verge3D GLTF, and then just select our file for export. Seems that not much changed, but now if we need to quickly re-export it, we can press F3, enter, and it's done. The file is re-exported in a blink of a second. That's really quick, and I really like it. It saves us from unnecessary clicks. Alright, so here is our project. If you don't know how to create a new project in Verge, I'd recommend you to visit a beginner tutorial. The link to it will be in the description of the video. Okay, now we need to go to puzzles. Okay, our scene is working, the effect is working, but it's kind of boring. The glow effect is not present, so that's why it's not so good. Let's enable it. For that, we need to go to post-processing nodes and select bloom. And basically that's it. Let's save it, start it. And now everything is shining brightly. That's pretty cool. We can work a little bit with these effects, maybe change a radius a little bit. maybe work a little bit with the strength of effect. So eventually we will get it just the way that we want it to. By the way, I don't recommend setting up a big radius setting because it will glitch a little bit. We don't want that. For now, I'd recommend to use the values below 2. Alright, now we are all set up. Please remember to save each time you change anything in puzzles, so next time when you open the project, your changes will be saved. Now let's go back to our Blender scene, and it is very important to activate Use HDR rendering under render settings. So if we want to use bloom effect, we need to go to render settings, then under the Verge3D settings, and make sure that use HDR rendering is activated. Without this setting, bloom will be low quality and not as good looking as it is right now. Okay, and now as we are happy with our result in Verge, let's enable this on-off animation to finalize the effect. And my favorite parts, F3, enter, exports done. Now let's just go back to browser, press F5 or refresh the page, and that's all. The effect is done. Alright, so today we learned how to fake spark particles using Verge3D with the help of Blender. Actually, I use this effect in some other places, for example here, which gives the backpack this kind of floaty magic sci-fi effect. It's pretty mild, but still it is noticeable. Also, I use the same effect here, where the sparks are slowly rising upwards from the floor. The example file, which we created in the tutorial, will be available for downloads on forums or using the link in the video description. Please do share your Verge3D scenes using this effect on forums. I would love to see what you came up with and in which situation you use this effect. Of course, you are free to use the image texture I created, but I strongly recommend you to try using your own, this kind of cloud noise-ish texture. I think that it will make things more interesting and more creative. Alright, it was Pavel Kotov, thank you, and see you in the next tutorial.